Welcome back to People and Politics. Mrs. Williams, may we talk a bit more personally? You come from what I suppose might be described as Labour's intellectual aristocracy. A middle-class background and a house in which politics and Labour politics were talked, as we said it briefly in the first half, day and night. Do you feel at all that you missed out, or that you miss out now in politics, not having a more proletarian background?
Yes, a bit. You're always stuck with where you're born, and I suppose one of my causes in politics is that people should be less stuck with where they're born, and one of the things that I most dislike about Britain is the way in which the class system hangs around us still, perhaps more than in many other countries. All I can say in my own defence, if I put it that way, is that I spent about 3 years of my childhood in the United States with a family I'd not met before I went to live with them. This was because I was evacuated there for part of the war, first half of the war, because my parents, as it turned out later, were both on the Gestapo Blacklist, and they felt they had to stay in Britain, but they didn't particularly want their children involved if there was an invasion, because they realised that they would probably be immediately killed. So that was some experience of a very much more classless society than ours. And then after I left school, I took a job for a while on a farm and then as a waitress, so that I could get some feeling when I was still just a teenager, I was about 17 and 18 at the time, of what life was like for other people. Of course that's unsatisfactory, but it's better than nothing, if I can put it that way.
Why did you say yes to my question that you miss the proletarian background? Why do you miss it? Why is it important? Because
a lot of the experience of politics, obviously, of the House of Commons and so on, is the experience of mixing with people who've got a life that is interesting to them, that fascinates them, that is full of excitement. And I think it's very important to appreciate, if you like, in your bones, how hard life is for a great many people, how hard it is to make ends meet, how tough it is to face the electricity bill when it comes in every quarter. And that's a feeling that you have in your guts, if I may put it that way. It's harder to realise at one remove. And although I've learnt something about it from, for example, looking after my constituents and so forth, it's not quite the same thing, and I can't pretend it is.
Why were your parents on the Gestapo blacklist?
Because they'd both been very much involved in anti-Nazi activities. My father was briefly in Spain at the time of the Civil War there. My mother had spoken as an author at Nuremberg, oddly enough, and her books were burnt there. We don't know the full story of why, we just know they were both on, and I suppose they'd made themselves, well, hardly popular with the Nazi regime.
At university you were something of an actress, if the biographies are correct.
Well,
I don't always believe what I read in the newspapers. You even auditioned for the film National Velvet. Did you seriously consider a life on the stage or as an actress?
No, not really. I was auditioned for National Velvet by sheer chance, I think, which was that
I could have been Richard Burton by now. We could have
I
been
know, what a lovely time we could have had
something.
together, and I'd have had a lot more diamonds than I actually possess, which is none. But, well, it was a chancy thing. What happened was that all the film critics in America at that time, this would be about 1942, I suppose, were asked to submit the name of one person from each region, each group of about sort of 6 states. And the Middle Western ones submitted me, I think simply because I was blonde, English and could ride a horse. It was as simple as that. Elizabeth Taylor was dark, English and could ride a horse, and she was a much better actress than I was, and that's why she got the job. I often thank my lucky stars that I was unsuccessful. I can't imagine anything worse in life than ending up in Hollywood as a rather second-rate actress.
Having been an actress, or even a second-rate actress, is it helpful in being a politician?
There's a touch of being an actress about politics, but I think the real pleasure of it was the marvellous sense of teamwork, the business of being involved together, the sort of excitement of the first night and so on. And I still remember it with great affection, but I'm very glad I didn't become an actress in the end. I think it's very hard to be yourself if what you are doing is acting a great many other people, and I'm glad I didn't go that way.
Why was it important to become an MP?
You know, it's funny, I don't examine that question very much because I suppose it was so much written into, as you rightly said, the whole tradition of my family. Not that one should be an MP, but that politics was meat and drink, really. And I might have been an agent or organiser, I might have been a political journalist, but that politics would be some part of my life, I almost never thought about. It seemed so inevitable. And I started very young. I was running around even in the 1945 election when I hadn't reached the age at which I was about 14 at the time, sort of dashing about taking canvas cards to and fro, and I was an agent when I was 20 and a candidate when I was 23
progress.
and so on.
Just a natural progress of...
A natural commitment, I think, more than a natural progress.
Nye Bevan, and you quoted Nye Bevan earlier, something else he wrote, if I recall it correctly, was that wherever he went in search of power, whether it was onto the Ebervale Council, then onto the County Council, and then into Westminster, he found power was not in fact there.
Yes.
Have you in fact discovered that on your journey, that power
Yes.
is a very difficult thing to find where it lies?
It's absolutely a fascinating question, and if anybody asked where power lay, I would say it doesn't lie in any single place. One of the things about a system like ours is that power is scattered, and so when people say, oh, the minister's got power or the prime minister's got power, they're wrong. No single individual has got that sort of power. What you can do in Britain depends almost entirely upon who you can get to cooperate with you, whether you can carry other people with you. And that's a very good thing in lots of ways, because it forces you to be at least reasonably humble about what you can do on your own.
I mean, when you read the Crossman diaries, as I don't doubt you've been studying them as avidly as the rest of them...
I guess we all have.
It's the impression that I'm left, what an extraordinary hodgepodge it all is, that ministers seem to rarely have time to discuss anything but their own departments. There seems a precious little central direction, little overall strategy discussion. Is it really as shambolic as is suggested in those diaries?
Well, I think there's two things to say about that. One is that we're reading about, at the moment, about Dick Crossman in his early months as a minister, and I think when you're first a minister you do have that feeling of being overwhelmed by your department. But I think probably things have changed a bit since Dick Crossman was in the government, in the sense that there is now rather more strategic control. There are bodies like the CPRS and so forth which bring together different aspects of policy. That's the cabinet policy staff, and you get I think now more of a tendency for cabinet to discuss the wider issues about the economy or Europe or our relations with Russia and the United States. And I welcome that, because I think that the thing that most worried me about the sort of structure that we have is that not enough time used to be spent, even now probably isn't spent, on these very broad issues.
I mean, you were, before you were an MP, I think you were General Secretary of the Fabian Society. You were
right.
Constantly turning out or seeing to the turning out of leaflets and tracts and think tanks, as it were. Does this go? Do you have time to do this now, or is your job just too busy for you to look at any other problems?
It's a problem. I mean, it's always difficult to find enough time to read as deeply as one would wish and so on. What I try to do is occasionally face myself with, let's say, having to give a lecture to a polytechnic or a university or something of that kind, and that forces me to think. But what I think one must say is that unless you're forced to think by a deadline, somebody which says...
Are you forced to think in cabinet, though? I mean, or is cabinet always about... I mean, there was a cabinet minister meeting today, wasn't there? I don't expect you to tell me what everything that was discussed. But I mean, what I'm seeking is, does that cabinet... that it doesn't appear to be any sort of philosophical approach coming through in the Crossman diaries. Has the cabinet become more philosophical?
I would say yes, actually. I would say that more time is now given to thinking about strategy and not just about the day-to-day problems. But certainly I myself believe that things could go further this way. I would like to see rather more of the meetings over a whole weekend or over a whole day in which nobody's allowed to discuss a departmental problem, but in which we look at the directions in which the whole government is going. I think we could do with more of that.
Is that Harold Wilson's style, though, really? Isn't his style really to keep you all apart and to have you worried about your little department and nothing else?
No, I don't agree with that. I don't know what he was like as the Prime Minister in the last Labour government, because I wasn't a member of the Cabinet. But I would say in this government that there is much more emphasis than I believe there used to be on this kind of coming together to discuss the wider issues. And an example of this are the meetings that he's held on some of these major issues like devolution, like the common market, like poverty and so forth. And I think that's a very useful development.
The other thing that comes through in the Crossman diaries is how difficult it is for a minister to get his way when his civil servants oppose him. Do you find that, or did you find that?
Sometimes I think that one of the problems that one has is that naturally a department is reluctant to change. Now, that's not the same thing as saying that it's always conservative with a little c, because you can find that a department will fight, for example, for the National Health Service because that's part of its new tradition. The difficult thing very often is to get a department to move on to a new start from the tradition that it's built up and that it's proud of and that it feels responsible for. That is a hard job, but it's not the case that civil servants simply oppose you for the sake of opposing. I don't believe they do. I think they honestly try to carry out what you want. But there is a certain reluctance to change, perhaps an acceptance that what they're used to works well and there's no reason to alter it. And if I may say a last thing about this, I think one of the faults that we politicians often have is to change things for their own sake. And by this I mean structural changes. We create big ministries, we break them up into small ministries, we have overlords, we have supremos. It's a mistake to make changes in machinery too often, because there are thousands of people whose lives you're affecting by doing that, and you've got to be very sure that you're doing it for a real purpose.
Who runs your department, you or the civil servants?
I think I do.
You're quite sure of that?
No, it would be wrong to be sure, but I think I do.
Do you keep a diary?
No. I sometimes think I should as a legacy for my old age.
Can we turn to the question of the common market issue and the forthcoming referendum? You've already made your position plain as what you will do if Britain votes against membership. You did that at the election and got properly praised for your forthrightness and honesty. But what would you do if you left politics?
Can I say, first of all, that I think what I said was misunderstood to some extent, because I didn't say that as a way of saying, then damn you, which I think would be quite inappropriate. I've always accepted the idea of the referendum, because I think this is a unique and special issue. I said it because I think that I would be incapable of being part of a government which had the job of bringing Britain out. What would I do? Well, I think I might bore somebody stiff by becoming an administrator of some sort, or I might go back into writing, or I might go and try to run a college or something of that kind. I'm quite clear there are lots of things in life I'd like to do.
There are jobs.
Lots of jobs.
During the referendum campaign, we're going to be treated to really quite extraordinary spectacle of members of the same cabinet touring the country, touring the hustings, I suppose they're going to be, speaking on opposing platforms. Do you really believe that such a debate can be conducted in the kind of kid-glove manner which everybody has piously expressed the hope that it will be conducted in?
I don't know, Mr. Gardner. I hope it can. I think there are grave risks. It would be silly to pretend there weren't. I think, incidentally, that the decision by the Cabinet to allow people to say what they believe in this referendum was absolutely crucial.
Well, it was probably the only possible one, wasn't it?
I think the government would have broken up otherwise, because there are people with passionate feelings on both sides, and they're very able people. They would be a real loss either way if they left the Cabinet. So we have to hope that we can keep it together. Myself, I think that depends above all on people's readiness to refuse to make personal attacks or to let too much bitterness come into what they say. I've looked a bit, and many people have looked in more depth at what happened in Norway, where undoubtedly the referendum had the most drastic effects on the parties and on politics in that country, which it's still not recovered from. And one reason for this, I think, was that a lot of extraneous things got dragged into the argument, including a lot of attacks from person to person. If we can avoid that, I think we'll get through all right. But I'm not sure we can. I hope we can.
It's pretty hopeful thinking to think that we can, isn't it? I mean, as you say, it's a passionate issue.
Well, you know, somebody said, what else is there but hope? You've got to work for that. There's no alternative. The only alternative would have been to say flatly, no referendum. And I don't think that was on, granted how divided the parties are within themselves on this issue, and granted the curious way in which the European Communities Act was carried through Parliament with a guillotine on most of its major clauses, some of which were not debated at all.
May not Cabinet break up willy-nilly That's the problem, isn't it?
I don't really think so. Despite the very great differences on this issue, there's been an astonishing degree of friendship in the cabinet.
The debate hasn't started really yet.
No,
has it?
all right.
We're
but
not out on the
had,
platforms.
No, but we had a lot of discussions about it, and there's been quite strong feelings. And there really isn't a piece of sort of soft soap on my part. The remarkable thing about the government, anyway up to now, is the degree of personal, if you like, pleasantness, amiability that still exists around that table, and I think in the parliamentary party on the whole, still also.
But of course, one of the problems will be that people will be speaking on platforms. For instance, I mean, people may find themselves speaking alongside Clive Jenkins and Enoch Powell opposing the market. Now, neither Clive Jenkins or Enoch Powell are given to mincing their words, and they're not part of this cabinet deal to be nice, are they? What I'm saying is that almost by association there are dangers, aren't there?
Yes, there are dangers, but I think it really is different if you have Enoch Powell denouncing you as distinct from a fellow member of a cabinet which you're going to sit round for the next 3 or 4 years. And you can easier live with Enoch Powell being nasty about you than with that. The only other thing I would say is that I think a lot of it really is just the respect one has for other people. I mean, for example, I've got profound respect for Barbara Castle and for Michael Foot, and I could go on, but, you know, I'd be happy to go on. But the point is really that you can feel that respect for Peter Shaw, for Tony Benn, as long as you don't allow the one issue which divides you to become dominating over all the respect you have for the other things that they do.
Now, will things ever really be the same again? I mean, you're all going to... The vote takes place, let's say the Marketeers win. The vote takes place, you all troop back and you say, oh, it was a nice month of May we had off, May and June from the other politics. Now we just forget it all. It's not going to work like that, is it?
It won't work like that. Of course it won't work like that. But I think that it can be got through. And I think that Harold is very good at healing wounds.
You hope so. There will be wounds.
Oh, of course there'll be wounds.
It's really going to be a fairly extraordinary spectacle, though, isn't it? I mean, of ministers. Never anything like it before, of ministers sort of touring the country, speaking against one another. Yes,
but then let's say directly, there's never been an issue like this before. I mean, I don't really think that since we've been a democracy, and I'm afraid being a woman, I pitched that back to 1918, I don't believe that since there's been a democracy, we've ever had an issue of this kind to settle before. It really is going to determine what Britain's like for the next 50 or 100 years. Can
you give us a hint of what will be in the referendum bill come in next week?
Well, I think what will be in the bill is obviously that there'll have to be the question, the way in which the organisation of the referendum's handled, the kind of information that will be made available and so on. And I hope that these matters will be able to be discussed by the House of Commons before any final decision's taken.
When you say that there is this passionate concern about the common market. Why is it so passionate to you that... I mean, aren't there many other issues in which you could continue a valuable and good life in politics without having to resign if things went wrong on this issue?
Yes, it isn't the only issue in politics. There are many others, and there are quite a lot of others about which I feel very strongly, which we haven't really touched upon much in this programme, apart from the one about, you know, regression in prices and poverty. The reason it's important, however, is because it in the end will determine whether Britain, in my view, is a country that looks outside itself, that becomes part of a larger whole or not. And I myself believe that the world desperately badly needs countries to come together rather than to go their own way. As far as I'm concerned, the reason I feel so strongly about it is because I think it's a first stumbling step towards getting the kind of international, ultimately even world authority that I believe in. And this is because I think the globe is becoming so small and its problems are becoming so common to different countries, pollution, famine, health, the whole lot, that I believe in the common market, as indeed I have believed in the Commonwealth, because it pulls countries together. And I don't want to be just a member of the government of an island on its own.
How, as Minister of Prices, will you answer the charge that will be made in the campaign to come, in the referendum campaign, that prices have in fact gone up because of the common market?
Well, it wouldn't be true. It might have been true, but it hasn't been true because world prices have leapt so rapidly. And what we now know is that prices within the EEC are just about the same as they are outside. The crucial point, it really is the crucial point, is that the days of cheap food have gone. They've gone whether you look at Caribbean sugar, or whether you look at American wheat, or whether you look at European cheese. They've just gone. And part of what we have to do is to learn that we're living in a different period of history than the one that we were living in after the Second World War.
Do you think people are learning that, or are likely to understand that?
I think it's very difficult for people whose memories go back to Britain during the war, let alone Britain before the war, whose memories go back to empire and to Britain as, you know, one of the world's 2 or 3 greatest powers, to accommodate themselves to the very great speed of change. And that's why I'm not surprised.
Are prices ever going to come down? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can you ever sort of think you can bring them down rather than slowing things?
They'll come down from where they are now. I've no doubt about that at all. They'll come down for a bad reason, which is, as I said, the world slowdown in activity. But when I said they'll never go back to where they were, they won't, because there are just too many people in the world and they're competing for the raw materials that exist. And we have been wildly, it seems to me, wildly uneconomic in the way in which we've used the fruits of the earth, if I can put it that way.
You talk about they'll come down for various reasons. They'll come down, presumably, if there's unemployment, won't they?
Oh, yes.
And is unemployment now part of Labour's economic policy?
I certainly hope not. I mean, I wouldn't want to be part of the government if it was part of our policy. Indeed, one of the reasons why...
But an acceptance of a higher level than in the past?
There'll be some increase in unemployment because nothing we can do will stop it. For example, we're not going to find it possible to increase sales to other countries as much as we would need, I think, to maintain very high employment, because they won't be buying. It's as simple as that. Well, some will, the oil countries, but a lot of other countries won't be. But no, the point really is that the more that we can keep our own costs down and competitive, the better our chance of maintaining a reasonably high level of employment. There will be some increase in unemployment, but I hope not to the level of the sort of 30s figure, and that's very near the level that's already been reached in the States.
What kind of, I mean, there is no acceptable figure, and I'm not seeking to trap you into saying an acceptable figure, but having said that, what is an acceptable figure?
Well, I think that we're getting close to the edge of what people will readily accept, and even that must be transitional. I think once you get up towards 1 million and beyond, that it's getting worrying. And above all, it's getting worrying when people are out for a long time. People don't mind, I think, maybe being unemployed for 5 or 6 weeks while they look for another job. What really terrifies people is when there's no other job to find.
But this is nevertheless a change of Labour thinking, isn't it? To accept it as a necessary part of the mosaic.
No, I frankly don't think I do accept it as a necessary part of the mosaic. I accept Labour movement as a necessary part of the mosaic, but I wouldn't believe that even present levels, about 3.5%, would be acceptable for more than a very brief time. And that brief time has got to be a time of adjustment to different sorts of jobs and different sorts of growth.
Can we come right round full circle in the last minute and a half or so to your own job? Don't you ever feel in this particular job that you're onto something of a hiding to nothing?
Maybe, but somebody's got to do it. And most jobs in government nowadays are hiding to nothing because people expect a lot, and circumstances don't allow us to produce a lot. And if I may say so in a word, I think one of the crucial jobs of a politician today is to promise no more than he or she can deliver. I think the greatest danger is to let people believe that one can promise and that the promises will be kept when they can't be kept, so we mustn't make them.
Is there a power that you would like to have that you don't have at the moment? I don't mean a magic wand to put prices down, but is there a power that perhaps another department exercises that you would like to have?
I sometimes wish that I had the sort of power that my French opposite number has, which is to sort of, as far as I can tell, sort of leap about the place and suddenly say, that particular price will be frozen. I haven't got that power. It would be useful in the case of, I think, a small minority of cases where you suddenly get a sudden unacceptable leap.
Mr. Shirley Williams, thank you very much indeed.